I gave my wedding ring to my daughter-in-law on the day she married my son. It was a family heirloom. My husband gave it to me on our anniversary, right before he passed. 2 weeks later, I noticed her finger was bare. When I asked her where the ring was, she rolled her eyes and said, "Why are you so upset? You'll be dead soon anyway." She had pawned it for $600 and a designer purse. But what she didn't know was that the ring had a clause in my will. A week after that, she received a letter that changed everything. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to the channel and let me know in the comments what time it is in your place right now. Have you ever given someone something so precious that losing it would break your soul? I'm Margaret, and I'm about to tell you a story that will make you question everything you think you know about family, trust, and the power of a mother's love. It was a Tuesday morning when I found myself sitting at my kitchen table, the antique sapphire ring catching the sunlight streaming through my lace curtains. My arthritic fingers trembled slightly as I polished the delicate Victorian setting, each stroke of the cloth a prayer, each gleam a memory of my beloved Richard. The ring wasn't just jewelry. It was 4 generations of love, sacrifice, and unbreakable bonds. I could still feel Richard's warm hands as he slipped it onto my finger 25 years ago, his voice shaky with emotion as he whispered, "Margaret, this was my grandmother's ring. She told me to save it for the woman who would love me through anything." Those words echoed in my mind as I prepared for David's wedding day. My son, my only child, was marrying Jessica, a beautiful 28-year-old with platinum blonde hair and ambitions that seemed to tower over her genuine emotions. Something about her smile never quite reached her eyes, but I pushed those maternal instinct beats aside. David was happy, wasn't he? Richard had given me the ring just 3 months before his cancer diagnosis. "Promise me," he had said, holding my hands as we sat in this very kitchen. "Promise me you'll pass this ring to someone who understands what love really means." I had promised, never imagining how complicated that promise would become. The morning of the wedding, I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, the ring heavy on my finger. My reflection showed a 68-year-old woman with silver hair and tired eyes that had seen too much loss, too much pain. The chemotherapy had ended 6 months ago, but the battle scars remained etched in my face. David didn't know about my own cancer fight. I couldn't burden him with more worry, not when he was starting his new life. "Richard," I whispered to his photograph on my nightstand, "help me make the right choice." The wedding ceremony was beautiful. Jessica looked radiant in her designer gown, David handsome in his father's tuxedo. But it was during the reception, as I watched Jessica laugh with her friends about the quaint little ceremony, that I made my decision. I approached her during a quiet moment, the ring box trembling in my hands. "Jessica, dear, I have something for you." Her eyes lit up when she saw the ring, but not with the reverence I had hoped for. Instead, I caught a flash of calculation, like she was already appraising its worth. "It was Richard's grandmother's ring," I explained, my voice thick with emotion. "She passed it to me, and now I'm passing it to you. This ring has seen 4 generations of love, heartbreak, and triumph. It's not just jewelry, it's our family's heart." Jessica's response seemed perfect on the surface. "Oh, Margaret, it's beautiful. Thank you so much." But her fingers gripped the ring like she was claiming a prize, not receiving a sacred trust. She slipped it on immediately, showing it off to her friends with giggles about vintage jewelry and family heirlooms. That night, as I lay in bed clutching Richard's pillow, I whispered a prayer that felt more like a plea. "Richard, please let this bring them the love it brought us. Please let me be wrong about what I saw in her eyes." But sometimes, a mother's heart knows the truth before her mind is ready to accept it. Sometimes, a mother's heart knows the truth before her mind accepts it. 2 weeks after the wedding, that truth began to show its ugly face at what should have been a simple family dinner. I had spent all afternoon preparing David's favorite meal, pot roast with carrots and potatoes, the same recipe I'd made when he was a boy coming home from baseball practice. The dining room table was set with my good china, the same plates Richard and I had used for every special occasion for 30 years. David arrived right on time, his face glowing with newlywed happiness. Jessica followed, her designer heels clicking against my hardwood floors like a countdown to disaster. She wore a new outfit, a silk blouse that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget, and carried a leather handbag I recognized from the department store windows downtown. The price tag on that purse could feed a family for a month. "Something smells amazing, Mom," David said, kissing my cheek. His touch reminded me so much of his father that my heart ached. "Just your favorite," I replied, but my eyes were already drawn to Jessica's hands as she set down her purse. Her left ring finger was completely bare. I told myself to stay calm. Maybe she had taken it off to wash her hands. Maybe it was being cleaned. But as we sat down to dinner, I couldn't stop staring at that empty finger. "Jessica, dear," I said casually, passing the green beans. "Where's your ring, the one I gave you?" She barely looked up from her plate, rolling her eyes in a way that made my blood run cold. "Oh, that old thing? It's getting resized." The band was too loose. Too loose? I had watched her slide it on perfectly at the wedding. My hands tightened around my fork as I noticed David's uncomfortable shift in his chair. He knew something was wrong too, but he was choosing to ignore it. "That's strange," I said, keeping my voice steady. "It seemed to fit perfectly at the wedding." Jessica's laugh was sharp, artificial. "Well, Margaret, you know how these vintage pieces can be. They're not made for modern hands." She wiggled her fingers, showing off a new tennis bracelet that sparkled under my dining room chandelier. "David bought me this beautiful bracelet instead, much more my style." The conversation moved on, but I barely heard a word. My eyes kept cataloging Jessica's new accessories, the designer watch, the expensive earrings, the purse that cost more than my monthly medication budget. Where was this money coming from? David was a good man with a decent job, but he wasn't wealthy. After dinner, I tried to pull David aside. "Honey, can we talk for a minute?" "Mom, whatever you're thinking, just don't, okay?" His voice was tired, defensive. "Jessica is adjusting to being part of our family. The ring will be back soon." "David, I'm not trying to cause problems. You just need to trust that I know my wife better than you do." His words cut deep, but the pain in his eyes told me he was trying to convince himself as much as me. That night, I lay in bed clutching Richard's photograph, my heart pounding with a fear I couldn't name. "Richard, something's wrong," I whispered to his smiling face. "That ring, it's not being resized. I know it's not." Sleep wouldn't come. Every instinct I had as a mother, as a woman who had loved and lost, was screaming that Jessica had done something unforgivable. At 3 a.m, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to drive by the local pawn shops just to check, just to prove to myself that I was being a paranoid old woman. But deep down, I already knew what I was going to find. What would you do if you found your most precious memory being sold for the price of a cheap vacation? I'm about to tell you exactly how it feels to have your heart ripped out and sold to the highest bidder. The next morning, I drove through downtown with shaking hands and a stomach full of dread. My old Honda puttered past 3 pawn shops, each one making my anxiety spike higher. At the first 2 shops, Quick Cash and Gold Rush Pawn, I peered through windows filled with desperate people's treasures, but saw nothing familiar. Then I reached Eddie's Pawn Gold on Maple Street. There, in the front display case, nestled between a collection of wedding rings from broken marriages and forgotten promises, was my ring. Richard's ring. The sapphire caught the afternoon light exactly the way it had on my kitchen table just weeks before. My legs nearly gave out. I gripped the door handle to steady myself, my breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. The bell chimed as I entered, and a middle-aged man with kind eyes looked up from behind the counter. His name tag read, Eddie. "Can I help you, ma'am? You look a little pale." I pointed at the display case with a trembling finger. "That ring, the sapphire ring, where did you get it?" Eddie's face softened with understanding. He'd seen this scene before, people discovering their treasures in his shop. "I'm sorry, honey, but I can tell you it came in about 2 weeks ago. Young blonde woman, maybe late 20s. She said it was her grandmother's ring, needed quick cash for some emergency." The words hit me like physical blows. 2 weeks ago, young blonde woman, emergency. "She sold it for $600, Eddie continued, his voice gentle. "Seemed like she was in a real hurry. Kept checking her phone like she was worried about being somewhere." $600. My family's 4GT. Narration legacy. The ring that had witnessed Richard's proposal, our wedding, our 25th anniversary. The ring that had been blessed by love and tears and hope, sold for the price of a designer purse. "I need to buy it back," I whispered. Eddie sighed. "I understand, but I paid $600 for it, and I've had it appraised. It's actually worth quite a bit more. I'd have to ask $800 to break even on my investment." $800 to buy back my own ring. I didn't hesitate. I pulled out my checkbook with shaking hands, my arthritic fingers struggling to write clearly. This was money I had been saving for my medical bills, but nothing mattered more than getting Richard's ring back home where it belonged. As Eddie wrapped the ring in tissue paper, he said something that broke my heart completely. "You know, ma'am, in 30 years of running this shop, I've learned to read people. That young woman who brought this in? She wasn't sad to let it go. Most people who pawn family jewelry, they're crying, apologizing to the jewelry like it can hear them. But her, she was practically skipping when she left." I sat in my car in the pawn shop parking lot, holding the ring and sobbing until my chest ached. Through my tears, I called Richard's memory like I had every day since he passed. "Richard, she sold our ring. She sold our love for $600 and bought herself a purse." My voice cracked with devastation. She looked at 4 generations of our family's heart and saw nothing but cash. But as I held that ring, something changed inside me. The heartbreak was transforming into something harder, something more determined. Jessica thought she could disrespect my husband's memory, my family's legacy, my dying wishes. She thought she could look me in the eye and lie about ring sizing while spending the money on accessories. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. I started the car and drove home with the ring safely on my finger where it belonged. But Jessica's betrayal had awakened something in me that had been sleeping since Richard died. She thought I was just a weak old woman she could manipulate and dismiss. She was about to learn exactly how wrong she was. Have you ever seen someone's mask slip completely, showing you exactly who they really are? What I discovered in Jessica's apartment that day would haunt me forever and fuel the justice that was coming. I didn't call ahead. I didn't warn them I was coming. I simply drove to David and Jessica's apartment complex with the ring burning like a coal in my pocket. My hands were steady now, my mind crystal clear. The crying was over. Now it was time for truth. I knocked on their door at exactly 6 o'clock when I knew they'd both be home from work. David answered, his face lighting up with surprise. "Mom, what are you doing here?" "I need to talk to both of you." My voice was calm, controlled. David stepped aside, and I entered their living room, a space filled with expensive furniture that definitely wasn't in their budget when they got married 3 weeks ago. Jessica emerged from the bedroom in a silk robe that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. Her expression shifted from annoyed to nervous when she saw me. "Margaret, what a surprise. Is everything okay?" Instead of answering, I reached into my purse and placed the ring on their coffee table. The sapphire caught the light from their crystal chandelier, another new addition to their decor. The color drained from Jessica's face. "I had the most interesting conversation with Eddie today," I said, my voice deadly quiet. "Eddie from the pawn shop on Maple Street. He told me about a young blonde woman who sold him a sapphire ring 2 weeks ago. $600, he said. She seemed to be in quite a hurry." Jessica's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. David looked between us, confusion written across his face. "Jessica." David's voice was barely a whisper. What is she talking about? But Jessica's shock was already transforming into defiance. Her chin lifted, and I saw the real her for the first time. Cold, calculating, utterly without remorse. "Fine," she snapped. "Yes, I sold the stupid ring. So what? It's just a piece of old jewelry, Margaret. It wasn't even worth much." "Just a piece of old jewelry?" I repeated, my voice growing stronger with each word. That ring belonged to Richard's grandmother. It survived the Great Depression, 2 world wars, and 4 generations of women who understood what love and sacrifice meant. Jessica rolled her eyes at me. "Oh, please with the dramatics. It's 2024, not 1924. I needed money for things that actually matter, not some dusty old relic from dead people." David was staring at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "Jessica, how could you? My mom gave that to you as a wedding gift. It was Dad's ring." "Your dad is dead, David." Jessica's voice turned vicious. "Dead people don't need jewelry. And honestly, Margaret, I don't know why you're so upset about this." She turned to me with a smile that was pure poison. "You'll be dead soon anyway." The words hung in the air like a curse. David's face went white. The room was so quiet, I could hear the clock ticking on their mantel. "What did you just say?" David's voice was barely audible. But Jessica was past caring about consequences now. "I said what everyone's thinking, but too polite to say. She's old, she's sick. Everyone knows about the cancer treatments, even if she tries to hide it. Why should I pretend to care about some old ring from a dead man when there are real things I need in my life?" I stood up slowly, my legs steady despite the size earthquake happening in my heart. This woman had just revealed herself completely, not just her greed, but her cruelty, her complete lack of human decency. "You sold it for a purse," I said quietly. "I saw the one you carried to dinner. $600 for a Louis Vuitton knockoff." "It's not a knockoff," she protested, then caught herself. "And even if it was, at least it's something I can actually use, not some meaningless family heirloom that doesn't do anything but sit there and collect dust." David was looking at Jessica like she was a stranger. "Jess, that ring. It meant everything to my mom, to my family." "Your family?" Jessica laughed bitterly. "David, we're married. I'm your family now. And I'm not going to apologize for prioritizing our future over some sentimental garbage." I picked up the ring and slipped it back onto my finger. "You're right about one thing, Jessica. You are David's family now, and families have responsibilities to each other. They also have consequences when those responsibilities are broken." "What's that supposed to mean?" she demanded. I looked her directly in the eyes, and for the first time since Richard died, I felt truly powerful. Some mistakes can never be undone, Jessica. Some choices echo through generations. I walked to the door, David following me with tears in his eyes. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I had no idea she would—" "I know, sweetheart," I said, touching his cheek. "This isn't your fault, but it is your choice what happens next." As I drove home, I wasn't crying anymore. Instead, I was planning. Jessica thought she knew who she was dealing with. She thought I was just a weak, dying old woman she could dismiss and disrespect. She had absolutely no idea what was coming for her. What if I told you that ring held more power than anyone could imagine? Not magical power, but something far more potent, the power of a mother's foresight and a father's wisdom reaching beyond the grave. The next morning, I called Harold Winters, our family attorney for the past 20 years. Harold had been Richard's closest friend since college, and he was the only person who truly understood the depth of my husband's love for our family legacy. Margaret. Harold's warm voice came through the phone. How are you holding up? It's been too quiet since Richard passed. Harold, I need to see you. Today, if possible. It's about the will. There was a pause. Harold knew me well enough to recognize the steel in my voice. Of course. Can you be here at 2 o'clock? Harold's office hadn't changed in decades. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs, and law books that looked like they held the secrets of justice itself. When I walked in, Harold rose from behind his massive oak desk, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. You look different, Margaret, he observed, gesturing for me to sit. Stronger somehow. I feel stronger, I replied, settling into the familiar leather chair across from his desk. Harold, I need to ask you about the clause Richard insisted on including in my will, the one about the family ring. Harold's eyebrows rose with interest. The heirloom clause? Margaret, that was Richard's idea entirely. He was very specific about the language. He pulled out a thick file from his cabinet. He said, and I quote, "If anyone disrespects this ring, they disrespect our entire family. They shouldn't benefit from the love they've chosen to destroy." My heart swelled with love for my deceased husband. Even in death, Richard was still protecting our family's honor. Tell me exactly what the clause says, I requested, leaning forward. Harold adjusted his reading glasses and found the specific page. Here it is. Should the family sapphire ring be sold, pawned, given away, or disposed of in any manner that shows disrespect to its significance as a family heirloom, the inheritance designated for the person responsible shall be immediately and permanently revoked. D. With said inheritance to be redirected according to the executor's discretion for charitable purposes. I felt a surge of vindication so strong it nearly took my breath away. Harold, the clause has been triggered. His pen stopped moving across his notepad. What happened? I told him everything. The pawn shop, the $600, Jessica's cruel words about Richard being dead and me dying soon. Harold's face grew darker with each detail. My God, Margaret, Richard would have been devastated. He set down his pen and leaned back in his chair. Are you certain you want to activate this clause? It's irreversible once we send the notification. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, I replied without hesitation. How much is Jessica set to inherit? Harold flipped through several pages. According to your current will, as David's spouse, she was designated to receive $150,000 plus a 50% interest in the family home upon your passing. The house is currently appraised at $400,000, so her total inheritance would have been approximately $350,000. She had thrown away a fortune for a $600 purse and the momentary satisfaction of cruelty. Where will that money go now? I asked. That's entirely up to you. The clause gives you complete discretion to redirect her portion to any charitable cause you choose. An idea began forming in my mind, something that would honor Richard's memory while helping other families facing the same battles we had fought. I want to establish a foundation, something to help families dealing with cancer, people who can't afford treatments, who are losing everything while fighting for their lives. Harold smiled for the first time since I'd entered his office. Richard would love that. What do you want to call it? The Richard's Ring Foundation, I said without hesitation, because he understood that true treasures aren't meant to be sold. They're meant to be shared. Rold began drafting the legal documents immediately. Margaret, I have to warn you. When Jessica receives this notification, there will likely be significant backlash. She may try to contest it, claim you're not of sound mind, accuse David of elder abuse to pressure you. Are you prepared for that battle? I thought about Richard's strength during his cancer fight, about the ring surviving 4 generations of challenges, about Jessica's cold eyes when she dismissed our family's love as sentimental garbage. Harold, I've been preparing for this battle my entire life. I just didn't know it until now. As I left Harold's office with the legal papers in my purse, I felt Richard's presence more strongly than I had since his funeral. The ring on my finger seemed to pulse with warmth, as if he was telling me I was doing the right thing. Jessica thought she could take advantage of a grieving widow. She thought she could disrespect 4 generations of love and get away with it. She was about to learn that some families fight back from beyond the grave. Ever wonder how it feels to watch karma work in real time? Sometimes justice arrives in a simple white envelope, delivered by a postal worker who has no idea they're carrying someone's entire future in their hands. 1 week later, I sat in my kitchen with my morning coffee, watching through the window as the mail carrier approached David and Jessica's apartment building. In his bag was a certified letter that would change everything. The letter was delivered at exactly 10:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I know because Jessica called me at 11:15, her voice shaking with confusion and barely controlled panic. "Margaret, what is this letter? What does it mean?" I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "Which letter are you referring to, dear?" "Don't play games with me." Her voice was rising toward hysteria. "This legal document about inheritance rights being revoked. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Jessica," I replied calmly. "The ring chose its own justice." There was silence on the other end, broken only by the sound of papers rustling frantically. I could picture her in their apartment, still in her expensive pajamas, trying to decode legal language that would determine her future. This says something about a family heirloom clause. What does that mean?" "It means exactly what it says. When you sold Richard's ring, you triggered a clause in my will that Richard insisted on including. Did you think there would be no consequences for your actions?" "Consequences? Margaret, you can't be serious. It was just a stupid ring." "That stupid ring, as you call it, was worth $350,000 to you." The silence that followed was deafening. I could practically hear her calculating the numbers, realizing what she had lost. $350,000? Her voice was barely a whisper. "Your portion of my inheritance, including your share of the family home. All gone, Jessica. Redirected to charity, specifically to help families affected by cancer. Families who understand the value of love and sacrifice." "You can't do this. I'll fight this. I'll get a lawyer." "You're welcome to try," I said, my voice steady as a rock. "But Harold Winters has been practicing law for 45 years, and every document is ironclad. Richard made sure of that." I heard David's voice in the background. He had come home to find Jessica in meltdown mode. Then the phone was snatched away. Mom, what's happening? Jessica is hysterical. There's papers everywhere." "David, sweetheart, your wife sold the ring I gave her for $600 and a purse. When I confronted her about it, she told me I'd be dead soon anyway, and that your father's memory didn't matter because he's already dead." The silence stretched so long I wondered if the call had dropped. When David finally spoke, his voice was hollow. She really said that?" "Word for word, son, and because of her actions, she triggered a clause in my will that your father insisted on including. Her inheritance has been revoked." How much did she lose?" "Everything, David. $350,000 plus the house. But your inheritance remains completely unchanged. This only affects her portion." I heard Jessica screaming in the background, something about lawyers and unfair treatment and how she was going to fix this mess. David's breathing was heavy on the phone. "Mom, I need some time to process this. This is a lot." "I understand, sweetheart. But David, you need to know something else. I heard every word she said that day. She showed you exactly who she really is. The question now is, what are you going to do about it?" After I hung up, I sat in my quiet kitchen, the ring catching the afternoon light. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Patterson next door watering her roses, completely unaware that justice had just been served in the apartment complex across town. My phone rang again an hour later. This time it was Jessica, and her voice was different, calculating, manipulative. "Margaret, I think we got off on the wrong foot. I was having a bad day when I said those things. Surely we can work this out like family." "Family," I repeated thoughtfully. "Jessica, when you looked at Richard's ring, what did you see?" What do you mean? Did you see 4 generations of love? Did you see my husband's grandmother, who wore it through the Great Depression? Did you see Richard's mother, who clutched it while waiting to hear if her husband survived World War II? Did you see me, wearing it at Richard's bedside while he fought cancer? Jessica was quiet. Or did you just see $600 and a shopping opportunity? "Margaret, please." "The ring chose its own justice, Jessica, and now you get to live with the consequences of showtime. Wing your true character." That evening, I called Harold to let him know the notification had been received. "How do you feel?" he asked. I looked at Richard's photograph on my mantel, the ring glowing softly in the lamplight. "I feel like my husband is finally at peace." But this was only the beginning. Jessica wasn't the type to accept defeat quietly, and I knew the real battle was just starting. What happens when someone you love forces you to choose between right and wrong? Sometimes the hardest battles are fought not with lawyers or judges, but in the hearts of the people we love most. David appeared at my door 2 days later, his eyes red-rimmed and his face aged by sleepless nights. He looked so much like his father in moments of crisis that my heart ached for both my men. "Mom, we need to talk." His voice carried a weight I hadn't heard since Richard's funeral. I led him to the living room where he had played with toy cars as a boy, where Richard had taught him to tie his shoes, where we had celebrated every birthday and Christmas for 33 years. He sat heavily in his father's old chair, his hands shaking slightly. "Jessica wants me to ask you to reverse the decision," he said without preamble. "She's threatening divorce if I don't convince you to change your mind." I studied my son's face, seeing the battle raging behind his eyes. "And what do you want, David?" "I want to understand how my wife could sell Dad's ring and then tell you that you'd be dead soon anyway." His voice cracked. "I want to understand how I married someone capable of that level of cruelty." She said those exact words, David, and she meant every one of them. David buried his face in his hands. "She's been different since the wedding. Spending money we don't have, talking about all the things we'll be able to afford when you're gone. I thought it was just excitement about our future together. But now you're seeing who she really is," I finished gently. "Tell me about the ring, Mom. Tell me what it really meant to Dad." I got up and retrieved the small wooden box where I kept our family photos. Inside were pictures spanning 4 generations. Richard's great-grandmother, grandmother, his mother, and me, all wearing the same sapphire ring. "This is Richard's great-grandmother, Elena," I said, showing David a sepia photograph of a stern-faced woman in Victorian dress. She wore this ring through the 1918 flu pandemic, lost 3 children, but never gave up hope. She passed it to Richard's grandmother, Mary, who wore it while working in a munitions factory during World War I. David studied each photograph as I continued the story. "Mary gave it to your grandmother, Sarah, who clutched it during every night of the London Blitz, praying for your grandfather to come home safe from the war. And Sarah gave it to me on my wedding day, making me promise to only pass it to someone who understood what love really costs." "Dad never told me all of this," David whispered. "He wanted the ring to speak for itself. He said if someone truly loved our family, they would feel the weight of all those generations of love when they held it." I paused, meeting David's eyes. Jessica felt nothing but its cash value. David was quiet for a long moment. "She's been talking to lawyers. She thinks she can prove you're not mentally competent to make these decisions. She's even suggesting that I might be manipulating you for my own gain." The accusation stung, but I wasn't surprised. "What do you think, David?" "I think my wife sold my father's ring for a purse and then told my dying mother that she'd be dead soon anyway." His voice hardened with each word. "I think she showed me exactly who she really is, and I've been too afraid to accept it." "I'm not dying, David," I said firmly. "My cancer is in remission. I have years left to fight, to love, to see grandchildren if God wills it. But Jess..." Micah looked at me and saw nothing but an obstacle to her inheritance. David's hands clenched into fists. "She's been planning for your death like it's a lottery win." "I have an offer for you," I said carefully. "I'll reverse the clause under one condition. Jessica has to sit in this room and tell me one thing she genuinely loved about your father. Not his money, not his family connections, not what he left behind. Something about Richard himself." David's laugh was bitter. "She never met Dad. They got engaged 8 months after he died." "Exactly. She never cared enough to ask you about him, to learn his stories, to understand why that ring meant everything to our family. She saw only what she could get from his legacy." My son stood up and walked to the mantel where Richard's photo sat next to a small American flag from his military service. "She asked me to take down his pictures after we got married, said they made her uncomfortable." The admission hit me like a physical blow. "Oh, David." I said no, but she keeps making comments about living in a shrine and moving on with our lives. David turned to face me, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Mom, I think I married someone who sees our family's love as weakness to exploit." "What are you going to do?" I asked gently. "I'm going to ask her the question you suggested, and when she can't answer it, because I already know she can't, I'm going to make a choice between right and wrong." David hugged me tightly before he left, and I felt Richard's presence in the embrace. Our son was finding his strength, just like his father had taught him. But I knew Jessica wouldn't go quietly. The real battle was just beginning, and she was about to show us just how far she was willing to go to get what she felt she deserved. The family fracture was complete. Now we would see who truly understood the meaning of loyalty, love, and justice. Sometimes the best revenge is living well and loving better. But first, you have to survive the storm that comes when someone desperate decides to destroy everything they can't have. 6 months after the letter arrived, I found myself sitting in a courthouse, watching Jessica's lawyer make his final, desperate argument to Judge Patricia Morrison. The divorce proceedings had turned ugly quickly, with Jessica demanding alimony, half of David's assets, and anything else she could claim. But today wasn't about the divorce. Today was about Jessica's attempt to have me declared mentally incompetent so she could contest the will. "Your Honor," Jessica's lawyer, a slick young man named Bradley Pierce, addressed the judge with theatrical concern. "Mrs. Margaret Whitman is clearly not of sound mind. No rational person would disinherit their daughter-in-law over a simple misunderstanding about a piece of jewelry." I watched Jessica from across the courtroom, noting how she had dressed for the occasion: conservative navy suit, minimal makeup, playing the role of concerned family member. But I could see the calculating coldness in her eyes that had never changed. Harold stood to address the court, his 45 years of experience evident in his calm confidence. "Your Honor, if I may call Mrs. Whitman to testify about the circumstances that led to her decision." As I walked to the witness stand, I felt Richard's strength flowing through me. The ring was safely on my finger, where it belonged, and I was ready to tell the truth. "Mrs. Whitman," Harold began, "please tell the court about the family heirloom clause in your will." I looked directly at the judge, a woman in her 50s with kind but sharp eyes. Your Honor, my husband Richard insisted on including a clause that would protect our family ring from being disrespected or sold. He said that anyone who could callously dispose of 4 generations of family love didn't deserve to benefit from our family's legacy. And what happened with the ring? I told the entire story, the wedding, gift, the pawn shop discovery, the confrontation, and Jessica's cruel words. I watched Jessica's face grow paler with each detail. She told me I would be dead soon anyway, I concluded, and that my husband's memory didn't matter because he was already dead. She reduced 4 generations of love and sacrifice to what she called sentimental garbage. Judge Morrison leaned forward. Mrs. Whitman, you paid $800 to buy back your own ring from a pawn shop? Yes, Your Honor. Jessica had sold it for $600, and the pawn shop owner needed to make a profit. And how did this make you feel? I thought carefully about my answer. It made me realize that my husband had been wiser than I knew. He understood that character reveals itself under pressure, and Jessica revealed hers completely. Jessica's lawyer tried to cross-examine me, suggesting I was confused, vindictive, or manipulated by David. But every question he asked only reinforced the facts. Jessica had sold the ring, lied about it, and shown complete disrespect for our family. Then Harold called David to the witness stand. Mr. Whitman, did your wife ever express interest in learning about your father's life or your family history? David's voice was steady but sad. No. She asked me to remove his photographs from our home because they made her uncomfortable. She never asked about his military service, his battle with cancer, or what kind of man he was. And when your mother offered to reverse the inheritance clause if Jessica could name one thing she loved about your father, what happened? Jessica couldn't answer. She finally admitted she had never cared enough to learn anything about him beyond what he might have left behind. The judge's decision was swift and decisive. Mrs. Whitman is clearly of sound mind and acting within her legal rights. The will stands as written, and Mrs. Jessica Whitman's inheritance remains revoked. Outside the courthouse, Jessica made one final attempt to manipulate David. "You're choosing her over me," she accused, tears streaming down her face. "No," David replied quietly. "I'm choosing right over wrong. There's a difference." The divorce was finalized 2 weeks later. Jessica received minimal assets due to the prenuptial agreement David had wisely insisted on, another piece of his father's practical wisdom that had protected our family. But the most beautiful part of the story was still to come. 3 months later, I stood in the community center downtown, cutting the ribbon on the first Richard's Ring Foundation support group meeting. The foundation was already helping 12 families pay for cancer treatments, and the donated money was growing every month. David stood beside me, his arm around Sarah, a kindergarten teacher he had met at the foundation's fundraising dinner. Sarah understood the value of family stories, asking detailed questions about Richard's life and treating our family's history with the reverence it deserved. "Mom," David whispered as I cut the ribbon, "Dad would be so proud of what you've built from Jessica's betrayal." I looked down at the ring on my finger, then at the families gathered to support each other through their darkest moments. "The ring found its true purpose," I replied. "It was never meant to just sit on someone's finger. It was meant to create something bigger than itself." That evening, Harold stopped by my house with a bottle of champagne and a surprising confession. "Margaret, I have to tell you something," he said, as we sat on my front porch watching the sunset. "I've been thinking about asking you to dinner for months, but I wasn't sure it was appropriate." I looked at this kind man who had helped me find justice, who had been Richard's closest friend, who understood the importance of family legacy. "Harold, Richard always said life was too short for missed opportunities." 6 months later, Harold and I were married in a small CE, Remini in my backyard, with David and Sarah as our witnesses. The ring stayed safely in its place of honor on my mantle, waiting for the day when Sarah proved herself worthy of its legacy. But that's a story for another day. This story is about justice, about the power of standing up for what's right, and about the way love can reach beyond the grave to protect the people who matter most. Jessica had thought she was manipulating a weak old woman. Instead, she had awakened a force she never saw coming. The power of a mother's love transformed into unbreakable justice. What if the most valuable things in life can't be bought or sold? A year after the courthouse victory, I was about to discover just how precious my family's ring really was. I sat in the office of Thomas Anderson, a jewelry appraiser Harold had recommended, watching him examine the ring under a powerful magnifying glass. His expertise had been sought by museums and collectors worldwide, and his expression grew more amazed with each minute he spent studying the sapphire. "Mrs. Whitman," he said finally, setting down his loupe and looking at me with newfound respect, "do you have any idea what you have here?" "It's my family's ring," I replied simply. 4 generations of women have worn it. "This isn't just a family ring," Thomas said, his voice filled with wonder. "This is a genuine Victorian sapphire ring, circa 1885, with natural Ceylon sapphires and old European cut diamonds. The craftsmanship is extraordinary, and the provenance—" He shook his head in amazement. "Mrs. Whitman, this ring is worth at least $15,000, possibly more at auction." $15,000. Jessica had sold it for $600 and felt proud of herself for making a smart financial decision. "There's more," Thomas continued, pulling out a thick reference book. "I believe this ring was created by Castellani, one of the most prestigious jewelry houses of the Victorian era. If we can verify the maker's mark, its value could increase significantly." As I drove home with the ring safely back on my finger, I thought about the generations of women who had worn it without ever knowing its monetary worth. They had treasured it for its emotional value, its connection to love and family, its symbol of commitment that transcended material concerns. That evening, I called David and Sarah over for dinner. As we sat around the same kitchen table where Richard and I had made countless family decisions, I told them about Thomas's appraisal. $15,000, Sarah breathed, staring at the ring with new appreciation. Jessica threw away $15,000 for a $600 purse. "No," I corrected gently. "She threw away something priceless for something worthless. The money doesn't matter." I opened the wooden box where I kept our family photographs and spread them across the table. "Let me tell you the real story of this ring." I told them about Richard's great-great-grandmother, Elena, who had received the ring as a wedding gift from her husband before he left to fight in the Civil War. He never returned, but Elena wore the ring for 60 more years, raising 4 children alone and never remarrying because she said her heart belonged to one man forever. The ring went to Elena's daughter, Margaret, my namesake, who wore it while nursing soldiers during the Spanish-American War. Then to her daughter, Rose, who clutched it during the 1918 flu pandemic that killed her first 2 babies, but spared her 3rd child, Richard's grandfather. Sarah was taking notes, her teacher's instinct to preserve important stories in full display. This was exactly the kind of response that told me she might be worthy of the ring's legacy someday. Rose passed it to her daughter-in-law, Mary, who wore it in the munitions factory during World War I, then to Sarah during World War II, and finally to me. I paused, looking at both young faces. Each woman faced a test of character while wearing the ring. Each one chose love over fear, sacrifice over selfishness, family over personal gain. "What was your test?" Sarah asked softly. I touched the ring, feeling its familiar weight. "I thought my test was Richard's cancer, watching him fight and lose and finding the strength to keep going. But I was wrong. My test was Jessica, choosing to protect the ring's legacy even when it meant losing a daughter-in-law and risking my relationship with my son." David reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "You didn't lose me, Mom. You saved me from making the biggest mistake of my life." Over the following months, I made a decision that would honor both Richard's memory and the ring's true purpose. I created a family tradition that would protect future generations from making Jessica's mistake. The ring would never again be given as a wedding gift. Instead, it would be earned through demonstrated character, through acts of selflessness and genuine love for our family's values. I wrote a detailed family history, documenting not just the ring's monetary value, but its emotional significance, the stories of each woman who had worn it, and the lessons their lives had taught. Sarah began volunteering at the Richards Ring Foundation, spending her weekends helping families navigate insurance paperwork and medical bills. She never asked about the ring, never hinted that she expected to receive it. Instead, she simply showed through her actions that she understood what true treasure looked like. 6 months later, David brought Sarah to Sunday dinner with a nervous expression and a small velvet box in his pocket. "Mom," he said after we finished eating, "I have something to ask you." "And I have something to give you," I replied, pulling out the wooden box that held the family photographs and stories. But first, I had one more surprise. Harold had spent weeks researching the ring's complete history through historical societies and genealogical records. What we discovered took my breath away. The ring hadn't just survived wars, pandemics, and personal tragedies. It had been present at some of the most significant moments in American history. Elena had worn it while volunteering as a nurse during the Battle of Gettysburg. Margaret had worn it while caring for Theodore Roosevelt's Rough Riders. Rose had worn it during the Great Chicago Fire, helping evacuate families from the burning city. "This ring," I told Sarah as David knelt beside her chair, "has witnessed more courage, sacrifice, and genuine love than most people see in a lifetime. It doesn't just belong to our family. It belongs to history itself." Sarah looked at David, then at me, then at the ring on my finger. "Mrs. Whitman, I don't know if I'm worthy of something so precious." "That's exactly why you are worthy," I replied, sliding the ring from my finger for what I hoped would be the last time I ever had to reclaim it. Jessica looked at this ring and saw only what she could get from it. You look at it and worry about what you can give to it. As David slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger, I felt Richard's presence so strongly that I looked around the room, expecting to see him smiling in the doorway. The ring seemed to pulse with warmth on Sarah's hand, as if it recognized that it had finally found someone who would treasure it properly. "There's just one condition," I said, as Sarah admired the ring through tears of joy. "You have to promise to learn every story, to understand every woman who wore this ring before you, and to pass those stories to your children." "I promise," Sarah whispered, and I knew she meant it. That night, as I sat in my empty kitchen with Harold, I realized that the ring's true legacy wasn't about avoiding people like Jessica. It was about finding people like Sarah, people who understood that some things are more valuable than money, more precious than personal gain, more powerful than selfish want. As the ring had found its way home once again, and this time I knew it would stay there. In the end, what we leave behind isn't money or jewelry, it's the love we shared and the lessons we taught. 2 years later, as I prepared for my 70th birthday celebration, I discovered that the most beautiful legacies are the ones that keep growing long after we think the story is over. The morning of my birthday dawned crisp and clear, with autumn sunlight streaming through the kitchen windows where Richard and I had shared coffee for 30 years. Harold was making pancakes, Richard's favorite birthday tradition, while I arranged flowers from our garden. At noon, David and Sarah arrived with their arms full of wrapped presents and Sarah's belly round with our first grandchild. The ring sparkled on her finger as she helped set the table, and I noticed how naturally she wore it, like it had always belonged there. "How's Jessica?" I asked David as we worked together in the kitchen. "Struggling," he admitted. "She moved back in with her parents after the divorce. The lawyer fees ate up most of what she got from the settlement, and apparently she's having trouble finding someone willing to date a woman who sold her husband's family heirloom for a purse." I felt an unexpected pang of sympathy. I hope she learns from her mistakes. She won't, David said simply. Some people never do. But I learned from mine, and that's what matters. The Richards Ring Foundation had grown beyond my wildest dreams. We were now helping over 100 families annually, and Harold had helped me establish an endowment that would keep the foundation running long after I was gone. The money Jessica had lost was creating a legacy of hope for families facing their darkest moments. During dinner, Sarah made an announcement that brought tears to my eyes. "We've decided on a name for the baby," she said, her hand resting on her belly. "If it's a girl, we're naming her Elena Margaret, after the first woman to wear the ring and the woman who taught us to protect it." "And if it's a boy?" Harold asked. "Richard David," David answered, his voice thick with emotion. "Because some names carry too much love to let them disappear." That evening, as our guests were leaving, Sarah lingered in the kitchen where I was washing dishes. "Mrs. Whitman, Margaret," she corrected herself, "I want you to know that I've been researching our family history. I found military records, immigration documents, even some letters Elena wrote during the Civil War." She pulled out a leather portfolio I hadn't seen before. "I'm creating a complete family archive, so our children will know not just the names of their ancestors, but their stories, their struggles, their triumphs." As I looked through Sarah's careful documentation, photographs, genealogical charts, hand-copied letters, and detailed timelines, I realized that the ring had done more than find a worthy wearer. It had inspired someone to become the keeper of our entire family legacy. "There's something else," Sarah said shyly. "I've been writing down all the stories you've told me about each woman who wore the ring. I want to publish them as a book, with all proceeds going to the foundation." My heart swelled with pride and gratitude. This young woman hadn't just accepted our family's treasure. She had embraced the responsibility of sharing its lessons with the world. Later that night, as Harold and I sat on the front porch swing Richard had installed 40 years ago, I reflected on how different my life had become since that terrible day when I found my ring in Eddie's pawn shop. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Jessica had never sold the ring?" Harold asked, reading my thoughts as he often did. "Then we never would have discovered her true character," I replied. "She would have inherited $350,000 and spent it on Eigner bags and spa treatments. David would still be married to someone who saw his family as a source of income rather than a source of love, and you never would have started the foundation." "And Sarah never would have found us," I added. "Sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most beautiful discoveries." As I prepared for bed that night, I looked at the ring's empty place in my jewelry box and felt nothing but peace. For the first time in 2 years, I knew it was exactly where it belonged. The ring had taught me that some battles are worth fighting, that character is revealed under pressure, and that justice sometimes takes time to arrive, but always finds its way home. Jessica had thought she was stealing from a weak old woman, but instead she had awakened a strength I didn't know I possessed. The foundation was thriving. David was happily married to a woman who cherished our family's values, and soon there would be a new generation to carry forward the stories and lessons that made us who we are. Most importantly, I had learned that the ring's power was never really about the sapphires or diamonds or Victorian craftsmanship. Its power came from the love that each woman had poured into it, the sacrifices they had made while wearing it, and the wisdom they had gained from protecting it. Jessica had seen only its monetary value and lost everything. Sarah had seen its emotional significance and gained a family, a legacy, and a love that would last for generations. As I drifted off to sleep, I whispered one final prayer. "Richard, our ring is safe, our family is whole, and our love lives on in ways we never could have imagined." In the end, that's what true treasure really is. Not what we can buy or sell, but what we choose to protect, nurture, and pass on to the people who will love it as much as we do. What do you think? Have you ever had to fight to protect something precious from someone who couldn't see its true value? Let me know in the comments below. Because sometimes the most important battles we fight are the ones that protect love itself.